Welcome to the first of a three-part series on upping your game in the Arado 234. I've been studying and testing this aircraft since it came out in beta, spent a lot of time in multiplayer pushing the limits of its capabilities, and have found that it's truly in a class of its own compared to any other ground attack or bomber aircraft in the IL-2 series. Compared to piston engine aircraft, it is easier to operate in some respects and much more difficult and unforgiving in others. The better you know this aircraft and what it can and can't do, the more you can exploit its capabilities. I want to start by briefly discussing equipment loadouts. When I tested speed loss on these various loadouts, I got slightly different results from what's posted. The most significant difference was the side mirrors. Personally, I never take them because I don't think they're effective enough for the price you pay in speed loss, and there are other ways to check your 6 without sacrificing speed. I always take the takeoff assist rockets. They're not that necessary on those western front maps with long runways, but they are a big help for getting off the short runways on the eastern front maps. And when you jettison the rockets, the brackets come off too, so there's nothing left to increase your drag once they're off. So it's all upside and no downside. I also always take the Drogue Chute. It's worth a small speed reduction because it's extremely effective in slowing down the aircraft after setting down, and the wheel brakes are not that great. If you misjudge your landing speed and end up coming down too fast, the Drogue Chute can often soften the consequences, especially on short runways. Standard guidance says not to deploy the Drogue Chute at speeds above 215 kph, but I've tested it at higher speeds and it will deploy at 300 kph and below. The Drogue Chute deployment handle is located here, and the Drogue Chute detach handle is located here. Two separate handles map to one control. If you accidentally tap your control button twice, that Drogue Chute will detach. It's kind of fucked up, but that is pretty much my only complaint about this whole package. In addition to taking note of the detach handle position, you can also double check Drogue Chute deployment with the BZA periscope, Keymapping location here, by hitting the 180-degree rotation button, Keymapping location here. And I want to talk real quick about engine startup. When I'm accelerating engines at startup, I'm looking at two things, and neither one of them is techno-chat messages. I'm watching for the throttle lever to slip past the throttle pile as I'm moving it forward, to visually confirm the pile is locked so I can release the ignition switch, and I'm watching the temperature gauges to make sure the temperature doesn't exceed 900 degrees and cause engine damage. I've noticed those techno-chat engine overheat warnings are a tad premature, and you can accelerate the engines fairly quickly after 5,000 RPMs. The 234 has a couple of unique systems, and the first is the PDS-11 Autopilot system. It's a 3-axis system, very state-of-the-art for a World War II aircraft, and it is a minor pain in the ass to keybind all the settings, but I'm going to show you how, and it's definitely worth it. There are 4 autopilot on and off switches in total, one for the autopilot master switch and one each for yaw, roll, and pitch. The keybinds are located here. For my setup, I just assigned them to the keys A, S, D, and F on my keyboard, and there are also keybinds for controlling the pitch, yaw, and roll channel trim located here. These are the switches for setting and adjusting the autopilot pitch and yaw functions. I map pitch and yaw channel trim to these switches on my throttle. For some reason I don't understand, there are keybinds to map roll channel trim, but they don't respond to input. So as you can see, I leave them unassigned. It appears that simply turning on autopilot roll keeps the aircraft from banking to the left or right while using autopilot pitch and yaw, and that's all it's meant to do. To turn on autopilot, you hit all 4 switches. And to get out of autopilot, just hit the autopilot master switch once, and it will turn off the other 3 switches automatically. A big benefit of autopilot is effortless climb. Instead of sitting there for 20 or 30 minutes pulling the stick back and watching your airspeed and vertical speed gauges like you do in a JU-88 or a Heinkel 111, which really starts to suck above 3K, you can just set the autopilot pitch. To do that, just turn on the master switch in all 3 axes and use the pitch channel trim to set the pitch angle. The cockpit pitch dial rotates counterclockwise for climb and clockwise for descent. Techno-chat gives players the ability to set pitch angle setting down to the decimal point, which, like that little digital compass in the bottom left corner, is precise information that real-life pilots didn't have. The pitch dial doesn't display any hash marks or numbers to indicate exact nose pitch, and neither does the turn and bank indicator just below it. So it's up to the individual player whether to use Techno-chat pitch angle number as the baseline metric for climb and monitor climb rate with airspeed indicator and vertical climb indicator, or use the airspeed indicator as the primary metric and monitor the climb rate on the vertical speed indicator. In either case, speed and vertical climb rate for a specific pitch setting will vary greatly based on fuel weight, bomb weight and drag, outside air temperature, altitude, wind direction and speed, and engine power. I ran a few climb tests to 5K using both metrics of pitch angle in degrees and true airspeed for 3 different aircraft loadouts: a fully fueled aircraft with photo equipment, and the 2 bomb loads I carried the most often with my normal go-to fuel load of 1800 liters. Sometimes I compared full power to nominal power for the same pitch, sometimes I didn't. These test results are posted in a downloadable chart I'm going to talk more about later. You can draw your own conclusions from the results, and as I already pointed out, there are many factors that can affect those numbers when you change my particular testing environment and conditions. The actual AR-234 reconnaissance pilots stated they climbed at a true airspeed of 400 kph, and based on my testing, I concluded there is a loose correlation among all 3 loadouts between a 6-degree pitch angle and a true airspeed in the 400 to 420 kph range. And that true airspeed range also appears to be in the ballpark for optimal climb angle and optimal climb rate. These are 2 important aspects of route planning we will explore in detail in video 2. I encourage you to run your own climb tests and see what you get. I'm not a big fan of that Luftwaffe split style airspeed indicator. You can't see true airspeed until the needle appears above 400 kph, and below that split is the needle showing indicated airspeed. So you're only being shown indicated airspeed at lower speeds, which is a lower number than true airspeed unless you're flying close to sea level. I only care about indicated airspeed for level bombing purposes within the context of this game, and I can see that in the bomb site anytime I need to. And that's a whole nother Pandora's box of unrealistic BS I don't want to go into. Maybe in another video. The 234 handles trim with an adjustable horizontal stabilizer. The gauge is located here, and the adjustment range is -100 to +100%. However, the PD-11 autopilot system inputs pitch adjustments via the elevators. I've experimented with proactively adjusting trim to match the autopilot rate of climb throughout the climb, and what I found is it just really doesn't make much difference at all whether you try to keep it trimmed during the climb or you just keep the trim at 0. The aircraft reaches 5K altitude at about the same time in either case. But if your trim is really off to an extreme degree like -100, the PD-11 will compensate with the proper elevator adjustment, but it will slow your climb rate and airspeed. When you use autopilot to climb, you can also make turns while climbing using the yaw trim channel control. The turns are slow and smooth, and unlike the autopilot yaw in the ME-410, this one stops on heading when you stop input. You will lose a little bit of climb rate during the turn, but not much. You can also use autopilot pitch into the negative range to set a consistent angle of descent, and we'll be discussing that concerning BZA glide bombing and egress off the target area later in this video series. Ironically, the one thing the PD-11 autopilot system can't do is provide a consistent level flight like you get using auto level. This is historically accurate. The real PD-11 had issues maintaining level flight, and there was no auto level function like we have in IL-2, and it was exceedingly difficult to use in conjunction with the LOTFA 7 level bomb sight. Pre-operational level bomb tests revealed the problem got worse when the pilot made small heading adjustments during bombing runs, causing the bombs to land way off the target by an average margin significant enough that once operational, very few level bombing missions were flown. And even when level bombing was attempted against the Ludendorff Bridge, pilots utilized the Egon 2 radial direction system, which was not very accurate either. In IL-2, however, you can achieve level flight using autopilots and make level turns using the yaw trim channel control. Obviously, you can already do that using the auto level and auto level turn functions. I personally think those are unrealistic functions, but if you're not interested in level flight or turns using autopilot, you can skip this section. To fly level using autopilot, first trim out the aircraft to level flight using the horizontal stabilizer trim, and then adjust nose pitch by feel using the autopilot pitch channel control. And I can tell you it won't be at the level setting on the pitch dial, which will actually induce a slight climb. A level flight setting will be slightly in the negative range. If you are using TechnoChat, that range will usually be somewhere between -0.3 and -1.8 pitch, depending on altitude, speed, and outside air temperature. After that, you just make small pitch and or trim adjustments to get the needle to sit on 0. You do have to keep an eye on it and make small adjustments as your speed increases or decreases. Once you've got the aircraft leveled out using the autopilot pitch, you can also make a very smooth and controlled level turn using the yaw control. And these turns are faster than auto level turns. Your pitch will drop a wee bit, but it's not too bad. Speed is the one capability that really makes the 234 exceptional, and knowing what speed to expect under various conditions is important for mission planning. I already did all the hard work to answer those questions by running hundreds of speed tests with different bomb loadouts, different fuel loads, altitudes, and engine power. I did it for my own benefit originally, but I have since posted these charts in Google Docs for anybody to download and reference. Now, my tests weren't scientific. I didn't run each test 100 times and subject my work for peer review, but I do use these charts in multiplayer all the time. All tests were done under 0 wind conditions and 15 degrees outside air temperature at sea level. The charts can be accessed by either altitude or bomb load as the primary reference metric. All bomb load options are listed, although I did not test the 20mm gun pods, but I can tell you a gun pod armed 234 top speed is almost identical to carrying one SC500 bomb. The altitudes listed in the charts are 100 meters followed by 1,000 up to 10,000 meters in increments of 1,000. Bomb loads are listed up to 8,000 meters, and 9 and 10,000 meters are listed for camera equipment loadouts only. There are separate columns for full power and nominal power. There are listings for 4 different fuel loads. To figure out your current fuel load in flight, check the 2 gauges located here representing the aircraft's 2 fuel tanks. The hash marks on both gauges measure fuel in increments of 200 liters. Just add the 2 indicated amounts and that's your current fuel situation. If your current altitude and or fuel load falls somewhere between the listed parameters, you will have to do some minor mental gymnastics to come up with a ballpark top speed for your current altitude and fuel situation. I normally always take a bomb sight and drogue chute, so they are included in the otherwise empty aircraft column. Since the bomb sight and camera equipment subtract 1 kph each, you can still use this column for recon missions, though you will need more nose-heavy trim for the camera equipment. There are 2 speed numbers listed in the empty column. The first is speed with no bomb racks. The second is speed with wing bomb racks. If you're wondering about the belly bomb rack, it's always installed there even if you don't take bombs. The listed numbers are true airspeed as shown on the airspeed gauge. The optimal trim numbers are for the listed maximum speed, and if you're just coming out of a climb and a lot slower than that speed, it could take several minutes of level flight to get to that speed. I learned in testing that perfect trim is not too important unless you're trying to squeeze out those last 2 or 3 kph to hit top speed. Trim doesn't have to be perfect, just close, but if your trim is way off what it should be, it will reduce the aircraft speed by up to 30 kph. Remember, these tests were under 0 wind conditions, and a full or partial head or tail wind will affect your speed. Air temperature also impacts speed. I've included separate temperature effects charts using outside air temperature at sea level as a baseline to allow you to calculate top speed across a wide temperature range. Just find the relevant speed number and multiply it by the number in the temperature chart for the current server temperature. If you're in a server that doesn't list the ground level ambient temperature on the map info page, the ambient temperature thermometer is located here on the lower left, and you must check it on the ground to get the correct baseline temperature to use with the temperature effects charts. Even at different temperatures, the original trim settings are still valid for top speed. If a box contains a dash, it means the top speed is either identical to that for 15 degrees or so close that a separate entry is unnecessary. I've also included enemy aircraft speed tables in the level speed charts and top speed comparison charts that we will discuss in depth in the next video, Know Your Enemy. Whether you use the charts or not, here are the big takeaways based on the information assembled. The altitudes where the 234 displays the fastest true airspeed is around 6,000 to 7,000 meters. But the interesting thing is there's just not a wide airspeed difference between high and low altitudes like you see in piston engine aircraft that often display true airspeed increases to the tune of more than 100 kph between sea level and 6,000 or 7,000 meters. Fuel weight differences do not have a big impact on level speed at lower altitudes, but can be pretty significant at the higher altitudes. Fuel weight differences do require differing trim input at all altitudes. Single bombs have a moderate effect on top speed, and there's only a small speed difference between carrying one SC500 or one SC1000 bomb. The additional weight and drag of wing bombs, however, does have a pretty dramatic effect on speed, and even after you drop them, the drag from those bomb racks is not great either. Outside air temperature exerts a significant effect on Arado 234 speed performance. The colder the outside air temperature, the slower it flies, and the hotter the faster. And I gotta be honest here, I don't know why it was modeled that way, because my understanding is that the increased density of air molecules and colder air temperatures should equate to increased thrust from the jet engines. I posted a question about this in the IL2 Reddit and got some thoughtful answers, with the most plausible being that the increased air molecule density creates increased drag on the airframe that the increased engine thrust cannot compensate for. But if that's the case, why doesn't that happen to the piston engine aircraft modeled in IL2, which collectively perform better under colder temperatures and worse in the heat? One thing revealed in testing is that these temperature effects are most pronounced at lower altitudes and steadily diminish the higher you go. At 100 meters altitude, there is a 50 kph top speed difference between 20 degrees and minus 20 degrees outside air temperature. But at 8,000 meters, that speed difference is only 15 kph. So I don't understand the logic behind this, or what data was used to model this temperature-induced speed difference, or if it reflects the reality of early jet physics, but it is what it is, and you have to take it into account. And the biggest and most obvious factor in top speed performance is engine output. The difference between full power and nominal power is huge, both in climb performance and top speed and level flight. In fact, the 234 carrying 3 SC-500 bombs at full power is faster than an empty aircraft at nominal power, and that holds true from sea level up to around 5,000 or 6,000 meters before that comparison starts to even out. Bottom line here is full power is gold. And full power can be the difference between being shot down in flames or watching that enemy fighter on your 6 sucking down your vapors as he gets smaller and smaller in the distance. But you're limited to 15 minutes of full power, right? Well, let's find out. I ran 20 tests with various loadouts at different altitudes and ambient temperatures, keeping time on the cockpit clock, and what I found was that the engine failure is randomized with no influence involved from external factors. As you can see, you got about a 70% chance of getting somewhere between 20 and 26 minutes of full power, and a 30% chance for only 16 to 20 minutes. So it's just good info to be aware of if you're in a situation where you have to exceed that 15-minute full power limit and you want to know the odds of how long you can get away with it. But full power can replenish. The question is, what is that replenishment rate? I ran several sets of tests to find out, and the results are posted in the PDF. In test set 1, I alternated full and nominal power in 15-minute cycles. In test 1A and 1D, I got a full 15 minutes of full power for 3 cycles, but got engine damage in test 1B at the 13-minute mark of the 3rd cycle, and in test 1C, 1E, and 1F, got engine damage at the 12:25, 13:30, and 14:42 minute marks respectively. In test set 2, I ran the cycles at 15 minutes full power and only 10 minutes at nominal, and not surprisingly got engine damage in the 2nd cycle of full power 5 out of 6 times. But the thing I noticed was engine damage didn't occur until after the 10-minute mark. So in test set 3, I started out at 15 minutes of full power, followed by alternating cycles of 10 minutes, and got 2 full cycles of full power on all 7 tests, 3 full cycles on 5 of 7 tests, and 4 full cycles on 2 of 7 tests. Now by this point, I'm still looking for the sure thing. So in test set 4, I ran the engines at 15 minutes full, 15 minutes nominal, and then 10 minutes at full, another 15 minutes at nominal, 1 more 10-minute full cycle, and lo and behold, got 3 cycles of full power on all 6 tests. Finally, in test set 5, instead of starting out at 15 minutes of full power, I ran the engines in 10-minute cycles and again got 3 full cycles of full power and even 4 cycles in 5 out of 6 tests. So all these tests so far are applicable to a mission where, for instance, you need to climb to 9 or 10K altitude for a photo recon mission, and you will need to alternate between full and nominal power on the climb. And you need to have full power to run around at 10K because the engines will shut down if you try to run at nominal power at that altitude, and actually they start getting kind of iffy at nominal power above 9K. But these engine management cycles will not work with my approach to bombing missions in the 234 because I generally use a 3-stage approach. Full power climb, ingress at nominal power, and switch back to full power for the move from the target IP through the bomb run and egress back across friendly lines. So in tests 6, 7, and 8, I tried out 3 different time sequences representing climb, ingress, and bomb run / egress, and they all worked just fine. Now the importance of all this information on engine management along with the climb data is because, and this is a spoiler for video 2, the goal is to orchestrate the first half of your route movement and climb in a way that ensures you have enough full power time remaining to get you from your target IP through your bomb run on the target and back across friendly lines at the fastest speeds possible, instead of being forced to lope along through these danger zones at nominal power hoping you don't get spotted. So far, I've limited my coverage of power management to 8,400 RPMs or 8,700 RPMs. There are obviously power settings in between those two numbers. Just know that any settings above 8400 RPMs will eventually cause engine damage. I have experienced this a few times when I accidentally bumped my throttle slightly higher than nominal power and eventually burned out an engine. So can you run longer on, say, 8500 RPMs compared to the 8700 RPM run times? Maybe. But I can tell you this, you're not reaching your full speed potential at 85 or 8600 RPMs. You're probably not going to outrun a P51 at 85 or 8600 RPMs, but you are going to eventually fry your engines at 8500 RPM and higher. So I look at it as a all-in kind of deal when running above nominal power with no in-between, and I strongly encourage you to do the same. This will all make sense when you watch the mission planning section in video 2. Engine damage occurs when you run the engines at full power too long or increase the throttle too quickly and overheat the engine. Engine failure occurs generally when you reduce the throttle too quickly. You can easily restart a failed engine, but restarting a damaged engine is a pretty iffy proposition, and I can get a damaged engine restarted about 10% of the time, and 90% of the time my restart efforts are rewarded with a big engine fire. Now I'm going to show you an in-flight engine restart, and I've heard more than once that to restart the engines on a Measurement 262 you need to be below 4,000 meters and at a speed of 300 kph or less. Well, even though the 234 has the same UMO 4 engines, I practice restarts all the time at altitudes and speeds much higher than the book answer, and you can see here I'm exceeding both those limits by a lot in this restart example. So I'll start by quickly pulling back the right engine throttle to induce an engine failure. The first step is to reduce the engine power to idle by pulling the throttle level down until it rests just above the throttle pawl. Second step is hit the affected engine on and off button once. This will unlock the throttle pawl. Third step is pull the throttle lever to the full back position. Now in Requiem's video on ME262 restarts, he said to hold the ignition switch down when you do this to minimize engine damage, so I usually do that, but honestly I don't know if it makes a difference. The fourth step is depress and hold down the engine ignition switch and watch the affected engine's temperature gauge to see it kick back on. And the final step is to slowly advance the throttle forward, keeping a close eye on the temperature gauge to not exceed 900 degrees. And you can release the ignition switch when the throttle pawl locks. The temperature gauge needle is a lot more squirrely on these in-flight restarts than what you get when you're starting engines on the ground, so advance the throttle with caution or you will get an engine fire and engine damage. If you're experiencing an engine fire, make sure your speed is above 500 kph and kick the rudder on the side where you have the fire. It should go out instantly. But the funny thing about engine fires in the 234 is I've yet to experience that inevitable explosion you get in other aircraft following an engine fire. In fact, I've flown it around with a flaming engine for 20 minutes in testing with no explosion. However, a flaming engine is visible from very far away like a giant neon sign, so in multiplayer at least, it's probably best to extinguish it quickly. If you're left with a single working engine, you should be able to still achieve around 450 to 470 kph speed at full power, depending on altitude and ambient temperature. But nominal power speeds are more like in the 280 to 350 kph range. Even if you lose both engines, the 234 glides pretty well. I tested different glide speeds at zero power, and I believe an airspeed in the neighborhood of 230 kph should give you a descent rate of around 5 meters per second, which is a lower rate of descent at that speed than you can get in a BF-110 or JU-88. So if you lose both engines at 5,000 meters altitude, for example, depending on winds, you should be able to cover around 64 kilometers before you're down to sea level. I've taken flak hits in the Finnish virtual pilot server twice in around 150 missions flying the Arado 234, and I was impressed by how it got back to the airfield and was landable with extensive tail damage. I took a flak hit once in 30 or 40 missions in combat box, but if you take one on the wing at 2.9K altitude from a Soviet 61K 37mm gun, that wing is coming off. And when I watched the playback, I was like, what the fuck is that gun doing in a late war Western Front server? But the 234 can survive multiple 20mm shell hits and still get you home. But a hit from a larger caliber shell will make for an interesting trip home. One-engine landings and deadstick landings are pretty straightforward affairs and not any harder than any other aircraft type. You just can't gorilla the throttle on the good engine up and down in the case of one-engine landings. Mach tuck happens when the air moving at the speed of sound hits your aircraft, creating a shock wave that induces loss of lift, loss of elevator effectiveness, and immediately causes the aircraft to nose down uncontrollably. There are a million pages of Mach tuck explanations online if you want to know more. For the subsonic World War II aircraft modeled in IL-2, including the jet aircraft, you are only going to hit Mach tuck in a dive. Every aircraft type has a critical Mach number that is expressed as a percentage of the speed of sound. If the speed of sound at 5,000 meters altitude is 1160 kph, and at that altitude your aircraft becomes uncontrollable at 920 kph, then that aircraft's critical Mach number is 0.7931. But speed of sound changes at different altitudes and air temperatures. So while the critical Mach number is a constant, the speed where Mach tuck starts can change. I don't think a critical Mach number was ever determined for the Arado 234, but I tested Mach tuck doing high-speed dives at 3 different outside air temperature ranges, and as you can see, the colder the environment, the lower the speed that will put you in Mach tuck. So it's a good idea on every mission to keep the current listed outside air temperature at sea level in the back of your mind if you are doing a glide bombing attack or in case you need to make a high-speed dive to shake an enemy fighter off your 6. In real life, aircraft control functions reverse when experiencing Mach tuck, but that is not modeled in IL-2 from what I can see. So to get out of Mach tuck in the 234, you simply pull all the way back on the stick and start cranking tail heavy trim as quickly as possible. Whether or not you can recover from Mach tuck and how fast you can recover depends on the dive angle you had when you entered Mach tuck. And the steeper that nose angle is, the worse your chances of recovery and the longer it will take. Now here's an example of a steep dive. The aircraft hit Mach tuck at 900 kph at 8,500 meters altitude. The nose tucks down and I pull back the stick and start pulling back on the trim. The aircraft begins to respond to the controls at around 6,000 meters. But it's not back to level until 3,500 meters. When you see the nose is coming back up, you need to quickly push the stick back down and start cranking trim the other direction toward nose heavy until you get it trimmed out, because it will immediately try to go into a steep climb. In video 2 of this series, we will explore Mach tuck in much more detail and how you can use your Mach tuck knowledge to your advantage when you have an enemy fighter on your 6. I hope to see you in part 2, where we apply our knowledge of this aircraft against the capabilities of aircraft flown by our potential adversaries to come up with plans and methodologies designed to make ourselves virtually untouchable. Thanks for watching. This is HVB. Peace out.